Hello, students. Welcome to the continuation of the lesson on Introduction to the Concepts of Poetry. In our previous lesson, we made mention of the fact that there are three genres of literature. These genres of literature refers to the branches or the arms that literature can be in, and these genres are prose, drama, and poetry. For this series, we are going to extensively delve into the concepts of poetry. So let's start. Among the three genres or poetry, okay, when we consider the three genres of poetry, poetry has had a very rich history that stretches back to ancient times, and over the past years, poetry has evolved with time and with culture, reflecting the changing thoughts and feelings of society. Now, throughout history, poetry has served as a means through which complex ideas are expressed, and they become essential parts of our literary heritage. There have been various eras, and these various eras have brought new styles, meanings, and use for poetry, making it remain relevant and powerful in expressing complex thoughts and human feelings. At the core of poetry is the use of words to represent, express, and recreate genuine human feelings. It's about crafting language that is not only meaningful but also emotionally resonant. What then is poetry? If you are asked to define poetry, what will be your answer? You can drop your response in the comment section. But to help us, there are some elements of poetry, and these elements help us to provide a working definition of poetry. These elements of poetry include artistry, economy of words, figurative language, and imagination. So, in sum, we can say that when we are referring to poetry, we are looking at a condensed form of writing where every word is carefully selected and artistically arranged. We could also define poetry to be the artistic expression that combines language, rhythm, and structure to create a unique expression of human emotion. Simply put, when we are crafting words to represent genuine human feelings, we are set to be engaged in the act of writing poetry. There are some renowned poets who have also provided definitions of poetry, and we are going to look at four of them. The first one is by William Wordsworth. He is a romantic poet, and according to him, he says that poetry is a spontaneous outflow of powerful feelings, and these powerful feelings take their origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. T.S. Eliot, a modernist poet, also described poetry as not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality. That is how T.S. Eliot views poetry. According to William Danton, he also defines poetry as the artistic expression of the human mind. Finally, Percy Shelley also suggests that poetry turns all things to loveliness. It exalts the beauty of that which is most beautiful and it adds beauty to that which is most deformed, strips the veil of familiarity from the world, and lays bare the naked and sleeping beauty which is in the spirit of its form. So these are some of the ways that these renowned poets have expressed as far as the definition of poetry is concerned. Why poetry matters? Is there a need for us to dedicate time to study poetry? Or, in other words, what are the roles that poetry fulfills in our lives as individuals and in the society? Anyway, poetry is not just words on a page, it is a powerful tool for communication, and it allows us to explore our emotion, share our thoughts, and connect with others. Okay, when we are considering the functions that poetry fulfills, we can look at them in two ways. We can look at the generic rules of poetry, and these generic rules that poetry play refers to the general rules or the traditional rules that poetry performs, and this includes entertaining, educating, and then providing beauty to be admired. These are the generic rules. So, considering the generic rules of poetry, we see poetry to be a powerful tool for communication. Okay, it is also an avenue for the exploration of emotions and sharing of thoughts. It's also provide us the avenue to create or to connect to our lineal heritage or our cultural heritage. It's a means to preserve our culture. It also serves as a tool for social and political satire. And finally, poetry edifies and entertains the society. Ha- Aside from these generic functions of poetry, poetry also plays an instrumental role, and the instrumental functions of poetry basically have to deal with how specific poems play specific roles. So here, our emphasis is the function that reflects the relevance of a poem to a specific situation. For example, a dirge has an instrumental function of mourning the dead. Okay, an ode is sung to praise an entity amidst its traditional function, and more. So, in considering the instrumental function, we need to bear in mind that they are the specific, okay, they are specific to the type of poem and the occasion of performance. In the instrumental function of poetry, the poet is the agent, the poem is the means, and the object is the reader on whom the poem acts. Every poem has an intention, that's a message that the poet must convey to the reader who is disposed to receive it. The message of the poem reflects its instrumental function. Okay. It encompasses what the poet seeks to do with his or her poem. And finally, we should bear in mind that the instrumental function of a poem can be known through the purpose of the poem, the type of poem, and the various thematic issues in the poem. I repeat, the instrumental function of a poem can be known through the purpose of the poem, the type of the poem, and the various thematic issues in the poem. Now, let's turn our attention to the characteristics of poetry. When we talk about the characteristics of poetry, we are looking at the traits that make poetry different from the other genres of literature. Okay. we are looking at what separates poetry as a medium of writing from other forms of writing. And I would like to group these characteristics or traits into the following. Okay, want to look at language, forms and function, forms and structure, sound, imagery, voice, theme, tone, and diction. Now, note that when you are composing your poem, these traits can be some considerations to cater for. When you are also analyzing a poem, these traits can serve as a guide to help you unearth some issues from the poem. We are going to look at these one at a time. The first is the language of poetry. Okay, we will explore the unique qualities of the language that poets employ in their poem. First thing we would like to discuss or talk about is that the language of poetry is figurative. This means that it employs the use of figures of speech in poetry. Okay, so the language of poetry becomes figurative when a poet employs or uses figures of speech in his or her work. Now, this is a powerful tool that poets use to create vivid imagery and convey deeper meanings. Okay, now when figures of speech are employed in poetry writing, what it does is that it alters the literal meaning of words to invoke feelings and images in the reader's mind. There are some examples of figures of speech. Examples like simile. We say that simile is a figure of speech, and with this, we mean that whenever there's a comparison with the use of like and as can be found in the example, the woman is as brave as lion. Because of the comparison of the woman with the woman and the lion, okay, with the use of as, we say it's simile. The opposite is metaphor, where we have a direct comparison without the use of as or like. Time is a thief. Here we are comparing time to thief. However, we are not doing it with words like as or like. We also have paradox, we have oxymoron, we have irony, and we have hyperbole, and more. These are some of the figures of speech that can be employed in writing poetry. Now, these figures of speech help simplify complex ideas and contribute to the depth of meaning within a poem. And then when figures of speech are employed in a piece of writing, then we see that the language of poetry, or it makes the language of poetry becomes what? Figurative. The second thing is that the language of poetry is imaginative. Here we are looking at the ability of poetry to rely on the poet's ability to make the abstract concrete and transform the unseen into vivid imagery using words. So when the poet is able to make that which is not seen to be seen with language, then we say that the language of poetry is imaginative. Now here too, when a poet chooses their words carefully, they create images that come alive in our mind. Through imaginative language, poets invite us to visualize their thoughts. This creative imagery appeals to our senses and evoke emotional responses. We can think about a poet who describes a scene, an experience, or even a character. Okay, whereby these evoke a sense of a mental representation in our mind, such that they will all bring a deeper meaning of the poem. The third thing about the language of poetry is that it is creative. Every word, every line, every stanza is selected carefully for an intended purpose. Okay, poet crafts language thoughtfully. Okay, there is no word or line or stanza used in a poem that is there for being basic. Every word, line, or stanza has been selected on purpose, and it is to achieve a particular purpose. Lastly, the language of poetry is connotative rather than denotative. Now, denotative meaning refers to the literal dictionary definition of a word. However, poetry focuses on the connotative meaning, the emotional meaning, okay, the emotional associations that a word carries beyond its literal meaning. That is what connotative meaning um, focuses on. For example, the word home may denote a physical building, but the connotative meaning of home could refer to comfort, safety, love, and it is this aspect of emotional association that poets leverage on to deepen the emotional impact of their work.